Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Claire Robinson. I'm the Customer Relationship Manager here at KRC. So thank you all for joining us for our monthly Agile webinar, which today is about scope creep. And hopefully your presenter, Keith Richards, is going to show you just how to make your lives that little bit easier. Next month's webinar is called Project and Product Environments. Do projects really exist in Agile? Now, due to Keith's diary being very full at the moment, we haven't actually found a free time slot for the next webinar, but it will be in about a month's time. So look out for your invites coming through by email. You can also keep an eye on our website, AgileKRC.com. Just go to the resources section and then click on webinars. And as soon as we find a free time slot, that will be advertised on that page and you will be able to register. If you want to access any of the previous recordings, you can also find them on this page. So go to AgileKRC.com, click on resources and then on webinars. The slides for today's webinar are available now for download. Again, just go to the resources section of the website and look under the heading free downloads. If you want to tweet about the webinar, use the hashtag AgileKRC webinar. That's hashtag AgileKRC webinar. So I'm shortly going to pass you over to your presenter, Keith Richards, but just before I do, just let me point out a couple of the features of the control panel, just in case this is your first time using the software. So if you look at the top right-hand side of your screen, you'll see an orange box with a white arrow inside. You can click on this to maximize or minimize your control panel. And if you'd like to ask a question, just type your questions into the question box and Keith will take as many of these as he can at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Keith.
Thank you very much, Claire, and welcome everybody to another webinar. Again, thank you very much for the fantastic feedback we're getting. We are very keen to keep listening to your feedback and subjects you want to talk about or ways to improve these webinars. But as I say, we're very appreciative of the things that are being said at the moment. Today's webinar is about how to avoid scope creep. I'll go through the structure in a moment and how we're going to go about this. Just by way of some name checks, we always like to look at the different countries and nationalities that are coming onto the webinars. Quite a few from Spain and India today. I don't quite know why they've suddenly come up on the radar a bit more than normal. And some unusual ones. We've got someone from Manila, and we've got some people from Valletta out there in Malta. So welcome to the KRC webinar. In terms of the structure, a very brief introduction about myself and where I'm coming from, but that will be brief. We'll talk about what scope creep is, because defining it is actually part of the problem. And we'll talk about the good news and the bad news and how to solve it and some tips for you. We've already got a few questions coming in, and funnily enough there's a bit of a theme. It's well, is it good or is it bad? And actually that's part of the theme of this presentation. It's to work out when is it good and when is it not good, and that's what we're going to be addressing as we go through this session. In terms of myself and KRC, we're very much what we call a pioneering training company. We don't just do the same old, same old. We've been doing it for about 15 years. We understand you've got to train people up, coach, mentor, and add consultancy in order to get yourself embedded to these different ways of working. So we've been specialising in Agile, and Agile at any scale. A lot of our competitors focus on big companies, small companies or whatever, and we do the whole lot. IT, non-IT, small, medium-sized, massive. You know, we deal with anyone up to the size of the Ministry of Defence. The experience I have is in things like Prince2, DSDM, Scrum, Agile, but as I say, I've been doing it since before the word Agile was invented. And just a couple of small things to end with there. Author of a book called Agile Project Management, which I believe is just going to be reprinted, and also recently won the Most Valuable Agile Player Award at the sort of National UK Agile Awards, which was a very nice thing to have. But without any further ado, let's get going on to the presentation and where we're going, and we'll talk about what actually is scope creep. Now, If you remember when you registered for the webinar, we asked you a question about how big a problem scope creep is for you. And what we like to do in these webinars is play back everybody's results. And they're quite interesting, really. So just to tell you what the raw results are, and then let's have a look at them. In terms of those people who thought it is not a problem, we had 4%. So 4% of the people on this webinar don't have a problem with scope creep. Now, two things to say about that. One is that is great news, well done. And the second thing is, I wonder why you're on the webinar. But stick with me, because I'm sure you can learn a few things. But it's a great thing to hear that it is possible, and it is something that you can actually get on top of. 35% of people were saying it's a little bit of a problem. So a third of you are saying it's a little bit of a problem. But the biggest figure, which is 51%, is saying it is quite a significant problem. So half of you on this webinar are saying scope creep is quite a significant problem. And the fact is that when we go into organisations, we're very careful not to go in and say, you need to do DSDM, you need to do Scrum, you need to do Kanban. We're very careful to say where are you coming from, and we ask people what their problems are. But I think it's fair to say that it's one of the top 3 problems that people just say scope creep. So for the half of the people listening who are having pretty serious problems with it, don't worry, you're not alone. The final category, which is 9%, is actually people who are saying it is a very serious problem and causing a lot of pain. So 1 in 10 are using language like it causes a lot of pain, and half of you are saying it's a very serious problem. So I think you can see that this isn't a small area of how we work in organisations. In fact, this is massive. And if we could, and I'm being a bit unreasonable to say cure it, but if we could reduce it and reduce its impact, there's massive benefits that are going to come out on the bottom line. So first things first, what actually is scope? It's one of these fantastic words that everybody knocks around in an organisation, but if you ever ask anyone to define it, there's a bit of a, well, it's kind of this, it's kind of that. And funnily enough, the word scope does have several definitions. A more general definition would be the extent of the work involved. But the extent of the work involved might include budget, time constraints, and a general, if you like, scope with a small s. But what in the Agile space, and what I'm going to concentrate on in this webinar, is really a slightly more restricted view of scope. And we're talking about, what the thing you're building does, what the features are, the requirements. So just to be clear with this definition, we're not including things like budget. We're not including things like, as I say, deadlines and such like. Now that's not to say they're irrelevant, quite the opposite. It's just to say that when we talk about scope and managing scope and scope creep, we're talking about the requirements changing. We're talking about, well, they said they wanted it to do this and they now want it to do that. But as I say, scope creep is a very, very common problem, and it's caused by people changing their minds, people coming up with new requirements, people decided that actually that thing I said I wanted I don't want anymore. I know I said this was 15 different requirements, but actually it's just going to end up being one flag on a screen. It's all the same thing. And equally, a little throwaway line where we want one thing suddenly becomes 15, 20, 30 things as the thing decomposes and almost like explodes. Now remember, I said that when we deal with organisations, we ask them what their problems are. And I'm always expecting change in requirements, scope creep to come up because it's quite normal. But one customer I particularly liked was when they said, well, we have a problem with scope creep, to be honest. And they then went on to say, to be quite honest, it's more like scope gallop, and that's why there's a picture of a horse. But here's the key to the presentation. Here's the key to the questions we're already getting asked into the question boxes. There are 2 types of scope creep. So the first thing I want you to try to get hold of if you want to cure these scope creep problems is work out, is this good scope creep or is this bad scope creep? And I'm going to show you what those 2 things actually are. So firstly, let's have a look at bad scope creep. What actually is bad scope creep? Now, what I'm going to go through is a list here of things that are the causes of bad scope creep. And if you can solve these these root causes, you're going to make your life a lot easier. So I'm going to go through them sort of one by one, but if you just want to do a little exercise with yourself while you're on the webinar, have a little think about how many of these are true. So just sort of go, on the project I'm working on, yeah, actually that's true. Because for every one you can put a tick against, it's causing scope creep, and it's causing bad scope creep. So let's have a look and see what sort of things we're actually talking about here. So first things first, what causes most scope creep is actually the project objective being unclear. And when I talk about an unclear project objective, I'm talking about things that are a bit woolly and a bit vague, and things like we need to seamlessly integrate a more efficient and effective customer proposition to etc, etc, etc. Now if you've got one of those as a project objective, you're in trouble. You need very clear, precise project objectives. What we do a lot with our customers and at conferences is try to get people to write their project objective down on a post-it note with a thick marker pen. And this is how we try to challenge people. Do you really understand what you're actually doing? We go into loads of organizations and they're saying, we want to go Agile because we're having a problem with our project. And often the first 2 or 3 days is spent going, what? Hang on, what's the project about again? Are you really trying to do this? Are you trying to improve customer service, or are you trying to save money? Well, a bit of both really. And when you get conversations like that, you suddenly realise these guys don't quite know what the actual objective is all about. Now, when I work in these areas, and I think you'd be stunned by how many people actually are working on projects today, and I hope people aren't looking at each other while I'm saying this, but I think you'd be amazed how many people are working on projects that don't actually have clear objectives. And I can give you a metric from the KRC work that we've done. The metric is 1 in 20 people have a very clear project objective understood by all people on the project. 1 in 20. And that is the root of most bad scope creep. Sometimes we meet people who've got a very clear objective, but it's actually wrong. So, for example, you might have an organization that's decided to go through a big rebranding process, and they don't need to. So they've come up with a clear objective, they've decided they're going to rebrand, everybody's clear about it, but actually the thinking behind it, the rationale behind it isn't actually true. So even if you've got a clear objective, is it actually correct? Now the reason I'm saying this is because if you get into the project 2 months, 3 months, and all the detailed requirements are coming out, you're going to get some questions like, hang on, is this really solving the problem we've got? But if we change it to that, I can't see the effect. Oh, well, maybe we'll do something slightly different then. And then that is called scope creep. But actually the problem happened a long time earlier. Another thing that sits with the project objective is something that we call the driver for the project. And when I say the word driver, I mean what has caused you to suddenly set up this project. So if I use the rebranding exercise, what has suddenly made you get out of bed one morning, or someone from the strategic level, and they've suddenly said, we've got to rebrand? What caused it? Was it a phone call from an irate customer? Was it they saw something on the television with a success story? What was the driver? Because if you can be clear what the driver is, you can then start to tease out what the objective is, and you can then start to tease out whether you've got the correct objective. Another important thing is, should you actually be doing this anyway? Okay, the business case stacks up, the project looks a good idea, it might make you some money, but does it fit anywhere into where you're going as an organisation? At KRC, I think it was about, from memory, about 8 or 9 years ago, we were doing very well in the Prince 2 market, but we decided that didn't fit with where we were going because we were an Agile company, and although we were making a lot of money from Prince 2, it wasn't strategic for us. So individual projects based around Prince 2 were actually, the numbers stacked up, but actually strategically it didn't. So this is what I'm saying, if we get some of the basics right, we can get very clear about what we're trying to do with actual scope creep. Another problem is the objective is imprecise. So let's say that you've got it right, you're trying to increase sales, and you've got the driver right as to why you need to do this. Because remember, another project is to reduce cost, whereas project B might be to improve sales, but you haven't got a precise objective. So you've said something a bit vague like, we need to increase sales. By how much though? 2%? 20%? 0.01%? What are we talking about here? So trying to get your objective precise, and without going into too much detail about SMART goals, specific, measurable, agreed, realistic, time-bound, you can actually try some work there. Another great thing that causes problems, and this is why this causes scope creep later on, is we haven't really knocked together a business case that's coherent. I spoke to, it's actually a competitor saying, actually, you don't really need a business case half the time, you've just got to do it. Well, I know I might be disagreeing with a few people listening, but at KRC we don't believe that. You've always got to have a business case. It doesn't need to be a complicated spreadsheet going over 50 pages, but we need to know why we're doing it, what the cost is, what the risks are, what the benefits are. And if you're not clear on that, again, you're going to find out as you go out through the project what exactly you need to do. And this final point on this type 1 of bad scope creep is another one that's a classic, and I'm sure half the people listening to this webinar are nodding right now. We've gone into solution mode too early. Now, when you solve it with buying a particular piece of software or a particular product, you then spend the rest of the project trying to get it into the shape that you wanted it to solve the problem that you weren't too clear about. Now, there are 7 things up there. How many do you think you can put a tick next to on your last half a dozen projects? And the scary bit is if you're on 0, great news. If you're on 1, you've got a bit of a problem. If you're on more than 1, you've got a massive problem. Now, because I've been doing this a long time and I know what's going on with some of you listening, my guess is, and I won't give you the percentage, there's a lot of you going, I think I could tick about 5 or 6 of these. Don't worry, you are not alone. But this is the root cause of most scope creep, that is bad scope creep. But is it all bad? No, because there's good scope creep. Again, from some of the questions we had in advance, there is an upside to this, and I'm not trying to put a positive spin on scope creep. I'm just trying to say to you, there's good scope creep. And good scope creep comes normally from what I call the detail, and it covers things like having a better understanding of the detail, getting a more accurate solution. Remember, in the early stages, you know roughly what you want, but do you know exactly what you want? Methods like DSDM call this convergence. The Agile community uses emergence, not quite the same word, but it's, we'll find out as we go along that the devil's in the detail. How about somebody comes up with a great idea? Do we want to sit there and go, sorry, out of scope? No, we don't. We want to incorporate it. It's good news. What if we actually find some mistakes, some poor understanding, a lack of knowledge? But here's an unusual one. What about things like creativity? I'm sure a lot of you listening are sitting there going, I don't want a bunch of engineers or developers or business people getting creative. We want to get to the end of the road here and get this thing over the line. But if you can be creative and think different ways of solving it, better requirements, you sort of come into the territory where I call it the killer feature. There are so many things. I don't know if it's a good example, but something like an IBM PC with a mouse. Okay, I'm going back a bit to most of you listening to the webinar, but sometimes there's just this, for want of a better word, USP, unique selling point. There's this killer feature. We don't really want to say, sorry, out of scope. We actually want to encourage that. So, better understanding of the detail, clarification, this is good scope creep. So look at all these changes that are hitting you. Look at all these problems you're having. Are they good scope creep problems, or are they type 1, the bad scope creep? Because we want more of type 2 and we want less of type 1. Right, let's have a little poll and see if we can get your views on where we are with these 2 sorts of scope creep. So I'm going to ask you a question now, and it's what type of scope creep do you encounter? So I'm just trying to get a poll up here, and there's going to be 5 options for you to look at. And I'd be very interested to get your experiences here in terms of what sort of scope creep you get. Is it every change is an opportunity and it's fantastic, or is it this case of somebody comes up to you and says, I've changed my mind, and your heart sinks and you go, oh no. One thing I must say about these webinars is how fast you guys are at voting. It's we've just about got 84, 85, 86% of you have voted already. So what we will do is draw a line there. Apologies if you're going to just miss it, but this idea of what sort of scope creep, I'm just going to show you now and have a look and see what we've got. So you can see what other people are experiencing with their sort of what they do. Now, first things first, and it seems not a surprise, but nobody gets always good scope creep, right? I'm just going to get my teeth working. So, not surprised there. And the other good news is hardly anybody gets always bad scope creep. But it is this balance between the two, good stuff and bad stuff. But can everybody see that it's more likely to be bad? It's more likely to be negative. And this is why we condition ourselves and we behave as if, oh no, they've changed their minds. Oh no, this has thrown up a few wobblies, which is a more sort of UK term. But again, if we'd cured the problems for type 1, I think you'll find those figures would flick around. Remember, 18% of people on this webinar are saying they get more good scope creep than not. And my guess is they are working in quite strong Agile environments. So let me hide that now and get on with a few more slides, because I want to show you how we're going to actually solve this. And the first thing is this thing about getting off to a good start. Start as you mean to go on. This is the key to success. Most things are going to be sorted in the early days. It's almost like first impressions last. Most problems occur at the start. Get this right and you're going to be in great shape. You can't build a house on sand, but we don't want to build a house on granite either. Granite being almost immovable. We want the balance between the two. So mantras that we use at KRC, and it's based on things in the DSDM method, is things like do enough and no more. Make sure it's safe to move on to the next stage. Dealing with a customer yesterday on a remote support that we're doing, and it was a really difficult discussion as to work out whether they'd gone off too quickly or not. But even if you get it wrong, the key is to say, look guys, have we done enough upfront work here? Is it safe? Have we really understood most things? Are these things clear? You know, can we get going? So a couple of tips here. Again, if you're using the DSDM method, you'll recognize some of the terms, but it doesn't matter which Agile approach you're using or how you go about it. You need to be looking at what I would call feasibility for a week or two. If it's a typical, say, 6-month project, just alter the ratios to suit your own situation. But the next point then, once you've had a look at some of the basics, clearly defined project objective, can we flesh out some of the detail to establish what we call firm foundations? But the key word there is firm. If you're coming from firm foundations, you're going to solve so many of your scope problems that you're going to make yourself a lot easier. So first thing there, start as you mean to go on, is one of the big cures for scope creep. The second area of improving to help you is what I call being change friendly with the techniques you're using. So if you've got very restrictive change control processes and some form filling in and it has to go through certain processes, it's not really conducive to change. So if somebody comes up with a killer idea, we're not really making things easy, are we? So things like some of the stuff we've mentioned in our previous webinars, which again are all downloadable, everything over the last 12 months is still there to download, but concepts that we've tried to introduce such as boulders, rocks and gravel. The idea of high-level big requirements, you break them down into intermediate requirements, you then break them down into fine detail. If you do this at the right stage at the right time, you'll keep the understanding going, you've got more chance of success. We don't want detailed requirements at the outset. This is another big cause of scope creep. You will know roughly the big size problems at the beginning. You won't know the detail at the beginning. So don't try and guess what the detail is. The Moscow prioritization technique is very good for handling change. Now, I'm not saying don't use 123N like in an Agile product environment, but what I am saying with Moscow is a lot lighter and easier and faster and more flexible, certainly in project environments. The idea of, look guys, is that a should or a could? You know, should we have it? Is it could have? Is it nice to have? Those conversations are very quick in terms of making change, easy. I have to say, I don't think prioritization is that much of a blocker in terms of 123N or what's called ordering. But as I say, these techniques are really quite simple to use. It's a term that we're finding our customers using a lot, but it's called trading. Admittedly, a lot of these are the big engineering companies and some software companies, but the concept of a trading space, we can move 2 new requirements in, you've got to pull out 3 old ones to make space. We find that makes change easy. Also, think physical. What is this physically going to be? What is it, how do I do this? Do I move post-it notes on a whiteboard? Am I using a big tool like doors? How do I physically do the change to make it easy? How do I control it? If you're on a very big project and it's safety critical, you're going to need a lot more control than if you're building, enhancing an existing website. How do you want this change process to look? And that's what I'm talking about, the physicality. This is why a lot of Agile practices are based around low-tech solutions like a whiteboard, post-it notes, index cards, fridge magnets. Now, don't take that the wrong way to think it's a little bit happy-clappy and too casual. What it is having the right level of governance and rigor for the conditions you're faced with. I'm dealing with people making massive engineering projects in sort of nuclear industry, and they can still, at the team level, run quite happily on whiteboards as long as the higher level governance is sorted out. So have a look at your techniques and what you're actually doing. The third thing I want to say about curing scope creep is this thing about getting close to the customer. I know it might be stating the obvious, and I know that most Agile approaches and most approaches anywhere talk about listen to the customer, but if you could get very close to the customer, and I mean very, very close, you're going to hear about the changes quick. You're going to hear about them accurately, and you're going to hear about them easily. It's just change will become second nature. They'll say, oh, I don't like that. Oh, I thought of this. Now, if they're with you, I don't mean necessarily in the same room, but if you've got contact with them, so this is fast, you're in the right place. You're change friendly. What I want you to try to get to is a state where change is seen as good if it's the right kind of change, and we can get change friendly. So again, a big point here, point number 3 if you like, is the idea about getting close to the customer or close to the business, however you refer to them. One quick thing I want to throw in here though is this concept called product owner. Often in the Agile space, this product owner role is seen as the be-all and end-all and solve so many things. And a lot of the time that's correct, but a lot of the time it isn't correct. The product owner is a single voice of the truth, if you like, but also a single point of failure. What is this person telling you? Are they representative? And often the product owner is the very easy way out. And what I'd like to say to you and ask you to think about is, would you be better getting a blend of the customer view, a blend of the business view, senior people, junior people, peripheral people? Let's have a little look at this, because often requirements come because people are, sorry with the cliche, but outside the loop. They haven't been included in a lot of the thought processes. Unless, of course, the product owner's doing that. And this is why I'm saying if the product owner is switched on, good facilitator, is managing the stakeholders, then that's lovely. But if they're not, you're going to get scope creep. I went to a conference recently, well, it was a presentation, and the person presenting had a beach ball. And they held the beach ball directly in front of us and you could only see, if you like, 3 colours. And they said, what colours are on the other side of the beach ball? And nobody knew. And this is what I'm saying about the view. You want to see the whole round, holistic view of the beach ball. You don't want to see just what's in front of you or your view. And this is why the product owner is really, really something you've got to be very careful with. Now, I'm not saying don't, or there's loads of risks. I'm just saying if you've got one voice, you've got, if you like, a catch-22. You've got a very fast mechanism, one voice of the truth, but as I say, potentially single point of failure. Again, the presentation's about reducing scope creep, and I find a lot of it is because you're only getting the information from one person. The final thing about scope creep is almost, I'd say, attitude and state of mind. Why don't you go, I don't know, I think it was Tom Sawyer that wanted to paint a fence, and it was a horrible job, but he decided to make out it was such great fun that everyone else took the job off him because they thought, crikey, he's enjoying this job, maybe we want to do it. So he then sat under a tree and ate an apple. Now, I'm not suggesting you should be trying to get out of some work here, but why don't you use a bit of reverse psychology, or just see change as a different thing? Just see it as actually good. One customer we went to a while ago, we'd done some training and consulting, went back in 3 months later, and they had embrace change written massively across the top of the whiteboard. And I said to them, I goes, why have you written that up there? That's quite good. And they said, because you told us to. And I thought, okay, right, fair point. And what I'm trying to say with this, though, is it's the attitude. Change is going to happen. It's a fact of life. I'm not going to be rude and say, deal with it. I'm going to use the great line from Simba in Lion King, which is laugh in the face of danger. If somebody comes up to you and says, hey, we've got to change, just smile and go, this sounds good, even though internally you might be going, oh, crikey. But be ready with the two most important questions. And just giving you a bit of thought, what would they be? If somebody comes up to you and says, I've changed my mind, I've got a new requirement, what do you ask them? Well, the answers are, yep, that's good news. What's its priority? So 1, 2, 3, must have, should have, could have. And the second question is, what are you going to take out to make way for the new requirement? That's the Agile way of working. We're not going to throw money at the problem. We're not going to extend the deadline. This just makes life a load easier, those two questions. Right, quick poll, because I've given you quite a few options there, and I'd like to get your opinion out of the 4 options that I've gone through. And this is a bit difficult for you because I'm going to ask you to pick one. I know you might have a 50-50. We're not on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, but if you take a look at the poll that's coming up now, in your opinion, so it's not a question of right or wrong, out of those 4, what do you think is going to help reduce bad scope creep? Do you reckon the good start? Do you reckon it's techniques that are change friendly? Do you reckon it's getting close to the customer? Or do you reckon it's attitude? Now, I reckon that's a very tricky question, so it'd be interesting to see what you... And because you're all so fast, we're already on 50%. And by the way, we've got hundreds listening here. We haven't got like 3 or 4. So it's nice to know that you're still on it. I think I'll end about there. We're on about just about 89%, oh, 93%. Okay, let's close this now and let's have a look and see where we are, because I quite like the results actually. First one, 3% said tools and techniques. Now, don't think, oh crikey, I'm in a minority, because actually that can be quite powerful. Handling change on a whiteboard can suddenly make things a lot easier. But the big ticket item there seems to be getting close to the customer. That's why I'm saying the product owner point is really quite important. Is that close to the customer, or is that close to one view of the truth? You will know whether you've got good product owners or, well, they're not that empowered and, well, they keep changing their mind. This is why that's so important. But just about half of you are up there with getting close to the customer. A quarter of you have gone getting off to a good start, and a quarter of you have gone for actually having the right attitude. Now, I know it's a very difficult question. It's a bit unfair in the sense it'd be nice to rank it, because actually all 4 are going to help you immensely. But as I say, I've tried to make it a bit tricky. I want you to learn, I was going to say work hard during your lunch hour, but I think about a third of the people probably aren't having lunch at the moment. So thank you very much for your feedback on that. Let's just try a couple more slides and we'll then get to the questions at the end, where I'll try and answer as many questions as I can, but I do need to manage your expectations. We can normally only get through about half, but we will try our best. And we'll try and end by about 1:20 UK time. One good thing about what I've gone through and trying to use these techniques is the importance really of something I call not getting emotional. Emotions, opinions, oh no, they've changed their minds, you know, expressions of like happiness or sadness. When it comes to change, I find what we get successful with our customers is to try to get them to be unemotional. And when I say unemotional, I don't mean they don't care, quite the opposite. But we've got to follow what we call the laws of physics. If you come up with a change that's going to take 3 days, you need to come up with something we're going to remove that's of the value of 3 days. We can only do 10 days work in 10 days. We can only do 3 months work in 3 months. So, you know, if we've got this good change, we've got to handle it in what I call just obeying the laws of science and the laws of physics. But equally, if you see a change where the goalposts have moved, then that is bad scope creep. And we don't get emotional about it. We just need to say, okay, the goalposts are moving there. That isn't hitting the project objective. We need to escalate. You know, don't say, oh no, we're doomed. Just say, that's a big change. We need to escalate. And if it's a small change, use the laws of physics to process it. Now, if the goalposts aren't moving, you know, we don't need to have something like the state opening of Parliament to actually control a change. Just do it. And this is why getting close to the customer is important, because you're quite simply saying, well, if you want this, we can do this, and if you want that, we can do that. 2 words we find that customers really quite like is this concept of breadth and depth. Breadth is goalposts. If the breadth of the scope of the project is moving, it's bad. We need to do something about it. But if it's just detail, it's good. Roll with it. As I say, don't get emotional. Just keep listening and reacting and converging on what your customer wants. But equally, to do this, the customer has to understand what you're doing. The customer has to work with you. This is why you need to train your customers into understanding the new language, the new attitude. Now, I'm sure you all know, a lot of you listening, you know, your good customers and your customers where, you know, they're a bit difficult. So a lot of this happens because you make it happen. I'm just trying to say to a lot of people listening, if you're struggling with certain things in this this scope area, it is these sort of things. You need to embed good behaviors. A lot of people work around these problems by building relationships, which I'm all for. But I'm just trying to say, if you could put the right techniques right in the center, you've got more chance of controlling your scope creep. Right, what I'm going to do now is hand back to Claire just to run through some things, and then I'm going to get ready to look at the huge amount of questions that have come through, and when Claire is finished, I'll try and get through as many of these questions as I can. So I'm going to hand you back to Claire now and start looking at your questions.
Thanks, Keith. So yeah, like I said earlier, next month we're going to look at project and product environments. Do projects really exist in Agile? No date assigned for that webinar as yet, so keep an eye on the website, AgileKRC.com. Click on resources, click on webinars. As soon as we get a time slot that comes available, we'll get that booked in and you will be able to register on the website. Otherwise, just keep an eye out in your email. You will get the invites sent through by email. Couple of things about KRC. We help organisations with their transition to Agile. We've got lots of training and support services available, including maturity assessments or project health checks. Couple of public courses coming up for you. We do offer a regular public course schedule. The next Agile Project Management public course is on May the 13th in London, and the next Certified Scrum Master course is on May the 7th in London. There are also dates for Certified Product Owner courses as well. I know that's something that's just come up in that webinar, so do get in touch if you're interested in attending a public course. The free downloads, including today's slides, are up on the website now. So go to the website, click on resources, click on free downloads. Social media wise, you can join us on our DSDM group on LinkedIn, or you can follow us on Twitter at AgileKRC. So we've got lots of questions coming through, so I'm going to hand you back to Keith now, and Keith, take it away with questions.
Thank you very much, Claire. Yeah, thank you everyone for the questions. They're all coming in thick and fast. I'll try to get through as many as I can and try and end at 1 20 UK time. So in no particular order, and just trying to do the best I can. Starting at the top, Stephen, I've got a question from Stephen. How does this fit around the Moscow prioritisation discussed in the webinar last month? And again, that's where I'm saying I think Moscow is a good technique to handle prioritisation. If somebody comes in with a new requirement and you say, how important is it? Oh, it's really important, we should have it. Okay, it's a should have. Let's have a look then at some of the could haves. Can we drop a could have out? Archimedes, displacement, that is why the Moscow technique is really good at managing the trading space. A second question was, how does scope creep differ from Agile requirements gathering? To me, that's an upfront activity of gathering the requirements. So, but they're going to be high level at the beginning. So gathering requirements is getting the requirements in. It's then, once you've got the requirements in and you start moving forward, they tend to change. So scope creep is something a bit more, I would call, in flight, about how things go once your project is running and you're trying to deliver something in, say, 6 months. That's not the same to me as the initial requirements gathering process. So thank you for your question there, Stephen. Question from Hitesh. As an individual, I might not be okay with scope creep because I'm resistant to change and hence consider it to be bad. Now, this is a really good question because it's a sort of an emotional, mental one. And what we find when we're dealing in Agile and we're trying to encourage people to be friendly to change with the good scope creep, what we find is some people just say, no, I don't want to change. And it's almost like a panic. And what you need to do there, Hitesh, this is quite complicated, but what you need to do is get behind the reasons for that. What is the baggage? What is the emotional connection with being resistant to change? Let me give you an example of something. It's only one. There's about 5 or 10 reasons for this. But if somebody says, look, I've changed my mind, I want this, and you say, okay, well, we'll put this one in instead and we'll drop that one out and you can have it later. If they find they didn't get it later, then they've been let down, and next time you say to them, oh, we'll drop this one out and you'll get it later, they go, no, you won't, we're not dropping anything out. It might be they get in trouble for not delivering exactly what has been asked for because their boss has signed the thing off. So Hitesh, it's quite a big question. I won't spend any more time on it now. It's a completely valid question, but you need to get behind what in the UK we call baggage. What is the emotional reasons for someone being change resistant? Just only had a thought. One project worked on recently, the person was going to possibly lose their job if they went down a certain route. This does tend to focus the mind. Question from Tim. I had a conversation with a prospective employer. We discussed the ability of Agile PM. I guess that Agile PM is the accreditation from APMG based on DSDM, and it says it doesn't work on fixed cost projects. Now, firstly, it does work on fixed cost projects. So you can have a fixed budget project of 100K and you can still play with the scope. It's just you're not going to deliver 100% of the scope. And the way to fix the scope and fix the price is to make sure your definition of the scope is at an intermediate, or, well, I'm not going to say high level because that's not the case, but at an intermediate level and not a detailed level. So Tim goes on to ask, so scope creep is part of this. How do you ensure that scope creep does not cost the project in additional change control? Well, again, this is about your techniques and the flexibility. If you're close to the business and we're making small, detailed business change, we don't want to be going through change control and spending 3 days, 5 days and analysing everything. Big change, yes, has to go through change control. Small change, no. So in terms of cost, by just using trading, look, can you take that requirement out and put that requirement in? That's at zero cost. But the people in charge of the governments need to understand that's happening. The business need to understand that's happening. Everybody needs to understand that's happening. And you might think I'm being a little bit simplistic and glib here, but I'm not. I've worked on many projects where somebody has just said, we don't want that, we want that instead. End of story, job done. Now, if you're building a nuclear submarine, it might be a bit different. But as I say, it's the level of control you need that's appropriate for your situation. What else have we got here? How do I stop developers it's another question from Stephen, might be the same one. How do I stop developers getting into solution mode too quickly? How do I get them to understand the difference of requirement spec as opposed to design spec? It's a really good question, Stephen, and this is why I highlighted it as one of the problems, and I brought it up last because it's just a classic. I was a software developer for, I don't know, over a decade. I won't tell you the languages I was a software developer in because that would embarrass me. But the solution ethos of a developer is, I think, in the DNA. Developers just solve things. No problem, solve, solve, solve. The thing you've got to give to a developer is the problem. If you get into solution mode too quick, it's quite damaging. So the question is, how do I stop them getting into that mode too quickly? The answer is, you do the upfront work and you tell the developers, we ain't solving anything just yet. This is why feasibility and foundations are quite important, and you do need to go, hang on, I think that's solutioneering. Let's try and make sure we've actually understood the problem correctly first. So it is about process. It is about not defining what the solution is too early, and that's what feasibility and foundations are, or however you want to call it. You could be in a Prince environment, or you built your own Agile front end. Just don't get into solution until you get into what I call execution and delivery. Think about what the solution might be, yes, but start to make it predetermined and the die is cast. Please don't go there. What else have we got here? We're getting through that one, done that one, that one. Kavita, is change of scope bad or change of high-level requirements bad? Because high-level requirements is what you start off with. Now, Kavita, I think that is where I'm going with this idea that when the high-level requirements are changing, what I call boulders, the big stuff, then that is going to be scope creep in terms of bad scope creep. And when I say bad, if the high-level requirements are changing, what's caused that? How come something really significant like, we need to sell books online? How come, well, maybe we don't need to sell books online? How can you have that level of change without not having a very well set up project? So if the high level requirements are changing, that is the breadth of the scope changing, that's the goalposts moving, that's bad scope creep. But if it's down at the detail, in terms of, if there's 15 fields on a screen and we're just changing 2 or 3, that's absolutely fine and dandy. Tim, question from Tim here. It says, the bottom line is change means more work and thereafter additional cost. I've tried to use trading space with an agency who did not want to do this. How can you make trading space attractive to an agency? Again, a brilliant question, Tim. It's so real world. It happens all the time. First off, you need to set that up before you work with the agency. You've got to say to the agency, look guys, there's 2 ways of working. One is we trade, or we have to agree some sort of fixed price, fixed scope at the beginning. Now, in other webinars we've covered this, and I'm going to give you a very simple short answer, Tim. It is the answer you're looking for, but it's only the high-level summary. Quite simply, if you don't use a trading space for your requirements, you have to fix the requirements. And when you fix the requirements and you fix the cost, you're going to have a winner and a loser. Now, it might be that you win and you're happy, or it might be the agency wins and you're unhappy. But somebody somewhere has got to take a bet that they've called it right. So if you give them a project and they sit there and they say, I'll bid £100,000 for it, they might get it done in 80k and they win. It might take them 150k and they lose. But there will be a winner and a loser. Now, the only exception to that is when somebody says, look, I'm happy to pay you for a bit more. And that moves into a different area where it's what we call opportunity cost. And with lots of projects and lots of different work going on, this idea of I'll pay for a bit more, I'll pay for a bit more, isn't really the Agile mindset. In terms of the project, it looks attractive, but in terms of the wider scheme of things, it's not good. It's called cost of delay, because Agile is based on the fact that we're very much feature focused, and we can give a little bit away of the stuff that's on the sort of the nice to have list. So as I say, if they don't want to play with trading, you're going to have to fix time and cost somewhere, and someone will be right, someone will be wrong. One of my customers at the moment won't use Agile in one area because they do this system of betting and they're winning. I'm not saying that they're winning more often than they're losing. I think they're winning all the time. So they're very, very happy. But trust me, if the customer was on the other side of the fence, I don't think they'd be so keen. Right, final question. I got somebody saying, "What do all the pictures mean, Keith?" Well, hopefully they should all be very self-explanatory. But if any weren't, and it's probably the one about the foundations, and it's probably dating me far beyond what I should be saying. But the pop group on the slide saying "start as you mean to go on" are the foundations, and that's what you've got to get really important. And I'm kind of hoping most people know that Moscow, that's a picture of the building in Red Square, I believe. And there's a very famous line from Vinnie Jones in a film where he says, "Don't get emotional." So apologise if the pictures get in the way a little bit, but that's what they're there for. Right, I'm going to come to the end now. I'd like to thank everyone again for the questions. Thank everyone for attending the webinar. If you'd like to give us any feedback in any shape, manner or form, we welcome it unreservedly. But this is Keith Richards saying thank you very much.